Okay, so real talk for a sec. We've all been there, right? Saturday afternoon rolls around and you're just glued to those home makeover shows. You know, the ones where they take a room from utter chaos to like magazine worthy in like 5 minutes?
Oh yeah, the decluttering montages, right. Those are always so satisfying to watch.
Totally. But today, we're going way deeper than a messy sock drawer. We're talking about hoarding. And to help us really unpack this complex issue, we've got the expertise of junk doctors. They're based right here in New Jersey, and they deal with the reality of hoarding cleanouts every single day.
And that's really the key point here. Because clinically speaking, hoarding disorder goes way beyond just, having a messy house or letting that junk drawer overflow. It's about having this really intense urge to save things.
Even when those things might not actually be all that valuable.
Exactly. It's more than just disliking throwing things away.
Yeah.
We're talking about a deeply rooted psychological condition here.
See, now this is what I always find so fascinating. I mean, we've all had those moments where we're cleaning out a closet, right? And you find something from way back and you think, oh, maybe you'll need this someday. But with hoarding, it's like that feeling, but on overdrive for basically everything in your house.
It is.
So where does that intense need to save everything actually come from?
Well, very often it starts with loss. And I'm not just talking about losing your keys or misplacing your phone. I mean, major life upheavals, a really difficult childhood, death of a loved one, maybe even job loss or a natural disaster. These kinds of events can leave people feeling incredibly vulnerable. And when that happens, people often turn to objects as a way to find some comfort, some sense of control over their environment.
So it's less about the objects themselves and more about what they represent. Like they become almost like emotional lifelines.
You've got it. And that's what makes things so tricky because as those feelings intensify, letting go of anything, even if it's something small or seemingly insignificant, well, that can feel really overwhelming, sometimes even impossible.
That makes a lot of sense, especially after hearing some of the stories from junk doctors about what they actually find during these cleanouts.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're talking rooms completely piled high with stuff, right?
Right.
And I know we've all seen it on TV, but to hear them describe it firsthand, it's kind of unbelievable, really.
It is. They've told me about situations where you can barely even walk through a room because there's so much stuff.
Hmm.
But, you know, more than just the volume, it's the emotional weight that's attached to each item.
Hmm.
That's what really gets me.
Yeah.
They told me about this one case. They found just mountains and mountains of old love letters.
Oh, wow.
Each one of them a reminder of this lost love. Can you imagine? Talk about emotionally charged.
Mm.
And that kind of thing, finding deeply personal items like that, it's something they encounter all the time.
It's heartbreaking, really. And it just underscores that hoarding is so much deeper than being messy or disorganized? So how do you even begin to make sense of all of that? Like, how do professionals, like the team at Junk Doctors, categorize these different levels of hoarding?
Well, they break it down into 5 distinct levels. 5. And it starts with what they call mild clutter. Now, this level, it's actually pretty relatable. Think of it as, a slightly more extreme version of what a lot of us experience. A little disorganized, maybe some clutter here and there,
Yeah.
but you can still use the space, right? It's not a safety hazard or anything.
So level 1, pretty manageable,
Yeah,
but I imagine it kind of escalates from there. What comes next?
it does get more intense as we go up the levels.
Okay.
Level 2 is where the clutter starts to become more noticeable.
Yeah.
You might see rooms that are getting a little bit difficult to walk through, and cleaning becomes more of a challenge.
Because there's just stuff everywhere.
Exactly. There's stuff everywhere. And you might even start to notice a bit of an odor at this level.
Okay, so not ideal, but not quite a disaster zone yet.
Right.
When does it cross that line?
Level 3 is where we really start to see those real-world consequences. We're talking about things like damage to the home windows or doors that are jammed shut because of the weight of the clutter rooms that are basically unusable.
Wow.
And because it's so difficult to keep things clean at this level, you might have pest problems starting to crop up.
So at this point, it's not just impacting someone's mental well-being, but their physical safety and their actual living conditions are at risk too.
100%.
Yeah.
And as if that wasn't enough, it can actually get even more severe.
Oh.
Yeah, level 4 is where we're talking about serious danger. Imagine blocked hallways, no access to essential appliances like your stove or your refrigerator because they're buried under piles of stuff. You might even be dealing with mold or infestations because of the lack of ventilation and hygiene.
It's hard to imagine someone living in those conditions.
It's really tough, and it becomes a major health hazard at that point.
It sounds more like survival mode.
You're right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's still one more level, level 5. This is where the home becomes completely uninhabitable.
Oh, gosh.
Think extreme structural damage, severe infestations, no access to basic necessities like a bathroom or a kitchen. At this level, it's not just a health hazard, it's life-threatening, and it requires immediate intervention.
Wow, that's a really stark reality check. Hearing all of this makes me think about the people who might be living with someone who's struggling with hoarding.
Right.
It can't be easy for them either.
Of course not.
So let's say a friend or family member is dealing with this and I want to help, but I'm also afraid of, making things worse.
Yeah.
What does Junk Doctors recommend when it comes to approaching a conversation about hoarding with a loved one?
They really emphasize empathy above all else. You have to remember that this is a complex disorder, often rooted in deep emotional pain. So barging in and demanding that they clean up this mess is just a recipe for disaster.
Okay, so you're saying those surprise cleanup interventions they do on TV are a bad idea.
Yeah, probably not the best approach.
Yeah, it makes sense. But seriously, what do you do? How do you help?
Junk Doctor says starting small and focusing on collaboration is key. So instead of trying to tackle the entire house, which can be super overwhelming, maybe suggest starting with something manageable like a single drawer or a corner of a room.
So meet them where they are and work with them, not against them.
Exactly. And just as important, let them maintain control throughout the process. The goal is to empower them to make positive changes, not to take over and dictate what they should or shouldn't keep.
Right, because it's their space and it's their journey.
Absolutely. And of course, seeking professional help is always a good idea. There are therapists who specialize in hoarding disorder, and they can provide guidance and support not only for the person who's struggling, but also for their loved ones.
It makes sense. Like any other mental health challenge, having a professional in your corner can make a world of difference. Speaking of responsible disposal, it's amazing how Junk Doctors tackles that challenge. I mean, we're talking mountains of stuff, right?
Yeah, it can be pretty mind-boggling. But you're right, junk doctors, their commitment to sustainability is really impressive.
So what do they actually do with all that stuff?
Well, first things first, they carefully sort through absolutely everything.
Wow.
Anything that's still in decent shape, clothes,
Yeah.
furniture, things like that. Those get donated to local charities
Here in New Jersey.
right here in New Jersey.
Mhm.
And whatever can be recycled, that gets sent to the proper facilities to be processed. So they're really minimizing waste as much as possible.
That's amazing. So they're not just cleaning up homes, they're giving these items a second life. Good for them.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the stuff and the logistics of it all, but we have to remember we're talking about people here, our neighbors, our friends, our family members here in New Jersey, especially when you consider that statistic from Junk Doctors that 26% of the state's population struggles with hoarding disorder.
That's huge.
There's a lot of people.
It is a significant number. And when you think about those levels of hoarding, we talked about those percentages represent a huge range of experiences, from mild clutter to those really severe cases.
It's a good reminder that hoarding is so much more common than we realize. And it's something that we as a society really need to address with more compassion and understanding. It's not about judging, it's about supporting those who need help.
I couldn't agree more. And it starts with recognizing that hoarding is a complex issue. It has deep psychological roots. It's not about laziness.
Yeah.
It's not about a lack of willpower.
Right.
It's about understanding those emotional and psychological factors that are at play and then addressing those underlying issues.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into hoarding, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
That hoarding is a human experience, and it requires empathy, not judgment. Behind every cluttered room and every overflowing box, there's a person who needs support and understanding.
It's about recognizing their struggle and offering help without judgment. That's a powerful message. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has shed some light on the complexities of hoarding and the importance of compassion when approaching this sensitive issue. Remember, there's always more to learn and understand, and every conversation can make a difference. Thanks for joining us.